everyone, I'm Kevin Martz, author of the soon-to-be released book Introverted Me, and since I'm in lockdown like probably most of you due to the coronavirus outbreak, I decided to make this little video to talk about some of my favorite introverted characters in fiction. If you're watching this video, you probably already know what an introvert is, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time defining it because honestly I could spend hours talking about that, and that's not what this video is about. I just want to clarify that introversion is not the same as shyness or social anxiety. Introverts are not afraid to talk to people and they don't hate everyone. Introverts also have friends and they also like talking to people. We just sometimes prefer to be alone because we get our energy differently. Also, just a heads up, this is a list of my favorite introverted characters, not the best or the most famous. So don't be surprised if I don't mention characters like Sherlock Holmes, Daria, Mr. Darcy, Lisbeth Salander, or Charlie from the Perks of Being a Wallflower, which are characters that I like but they're not my favorite. Okay, let's begin. Hiccup is one of my two all-time favorite fictional characters. I love him so much. He's a fellow INTP like me, and for those of you who don't know, INTP is one of the 16 Myers-Briggs personality types, and it stands for Introverted, Intuitive, Thinking, and Perceiving. Hiccup is independent, creative, and analytical. He has great observational skills, and he enjoys to spend time by himself. Some of his favorite activities include drawing, developing new inventions, and spending time out in nature, flying with his dragon toothless. He doesn't like attention or big crowds, as demonstrated at the beginning of the second movie, because when everybody was at the dragon race, he was far away from there, exploring new regions with Toothless, even though he is the best dragon rider in Berg. Also, in the first movie, when he starts to get popular, instead of asking the attention, he makes excuses to escape and go spend some alone time with Toothless. Hiccup also has a strong moral compass and is a reluctant leader. He makes it perfectly clear that he doesn't want to be the chief of Berg. He doesn't want to deal with people all day or have the burden of people looking up to him, but when that responsibility is thrust upon him, he works hard to be the best chief he can. Also, as I'm sure many introverts can relate, all through the beginning of the first movie, he is told multiple times that he has to change and be more like everybody else, which makes him feel self-conscious and insecure. But instead of changing, he used his abilities and compassion to make everybody else open their minds and change their way of living for the better. If you haven't watched these movies, please watch them, they're amazing, they're not just for kids, and since Toy Story is no longer a trilogy, I would even go as far as saying that the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy is the best animated trilogy of all time. Granted, I'm a little bit biased, but they're amazing, I swear. Katniss. Where do I begin with Katniss? She is not only one of the best action heroines of modern fiction, she is also a great representation of an introvert and one of the characters that I can relate to the most. She is self-reliant, resilient, and an outside-of-the-box thinker. She has great observational skills, which helps her study carefully her adversaries and survive the Hunger Games. She is also reflective, resourceful, stubborn, and bold. She doesn't have many friends, and before the Hunger Games she spent most of her time in the wilderness, hunting alone or with Gale. She is cautious and has a hard time trusting others because she always expects the worst from people, but when she finally lets someone in, she is as loyal and protective as one person can be. Katniss is also kind and selfless, but due to her quiet nature, she sometimes is perceived as cold, uninterested, and even like kind of a bitch, which I'm sure many introverts can relate to that, myself included. She is quiet, but she isn't shy. She can put on a show when she needs to, but it doesn't come naturally to her, which is why Effie and Haymitch are constantly reminding her to smile and appear warmer for the cameras. She doesn't like being the center of attention, and she hates being put on display in front of a crowd, but she can do it when she has to. Katniss is nowhere near perfect. She can be moody, aggressive, impatient, and cold, which honestly was very refreshing to read and see. Katniss's introversion is way more noticeable in the books than in the movies, so if you haven't read them, I highly recommend that you do. Yes, the perpetual lovable loser. Charlie Brown is one of my favorite cartoon characters of all time because I can relate to him a lot, and that's mainly for two reasons. One, he loves dogs, and two, he's a big overthinker. He's constantly worrying about everything and talking to himself. He's very insightful and kind-hearted, but also quite insecure. He's a person that's much more acquainted with losing than with winning. He fails at almost everything he does, and he has an almost continuous strike of bad luck. But this doesn't stop him from trying again and again. He can also be very pessimistic one day and the most optimistic person ever the next day, which is something that I can relate to a lot too. Charlie Brown has a bunch of friends, all the Peanuts gang, but he also spends a lot of time by himself, observing the world with high precision and overanalyzing everything around him. And of course, he also enjoys spending time with his loyal and mischievous dog Snoopy. I like Charlie Brown a lot. I can relate to him on so many levels, and if you've never watched or read anything with him, I highly recommend that you watch the classic 60s movies, Charlie Brown Christmas and It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, or the 2015 Peanuts movie, which was surprisingly good and had a stunning animation. Portrayed by the amazing Tina Fey, Liz Lemon is the main character of 30 Rock, one of the best sitcoms ever and personally my favorite sitcom of all time. She's the head writer of a comedy show similar to SNL, and she's awkward, neurotic, witty, and sarcastic. She's a workaholic who has very few social skills and is both very confident and quite insecure. She doesn't know how to make friends as an adult, she prefers to spend a night in rather than going to the club, and she has severe intimacy issues. Her dating history is a mess, and she prefers to hide her feelings or joke about them rather than talk earnestly about them. She is also a control freak. She needs to be in charge of everything, and she thrives when everything in her life is planned out and scheduled. Spontaneity is not her strong suit, and she has a hard time letting things go. She can also be selfish, vindictive, and deceitful, which again was something that I highly appreciated while I was watching the show. I have a hard time believing when characters are portrayed as perfect saints that always do the right thing. It's very unrealistic, which is one of the reasons that I love this show so much. The characters are very goofy, but they feel real because sometimes they can be pretty awful, as all human beings can be. That's why so many people could relate to Liz Lemon when the show first aired. She is a deeply flawed character, and that's okay. 30 Rock is a TV show that I cannot recommend enough. If you haven't watched it, please give it a try. The first few episodes are kinda boring, but the second and third seasons are some of the best pieces of television I have ever seen. L is one of the main characters of Death Note. He's a highly esteemed international detective who is in charge of the investigation to capture Kira, the person in possession of Death Note that's killing the world's worst criminals in order to create a new world. He's a very rational, intelligent, and calculated individual. He can be deceitful to get what he wants, which most of the times is to prove that his theories are correct. He's a genius, but he has trouble with social interaction and people's feelings. He's also very analytical. He's always analyzing everything around him and going through dozens of different scenarios in his head. He tends to second guess everything he's presented with, and he's extremely meticulous and perceptive. I haven't watched a lot of anime, just the classic ones like Dragon Ball and Pokemon, but Death Note is an anime that a lot of people have recommended me, and I gotta say that it really surprised me. It has an interesting plot, smart dialogues, and some pretty unique characters. I would definitely recommend that if you like mysteries, detective stories, or just want to watch something different. Kayla is the protagonist of 8th Grade, a coming-of-age movie about a middle school girl who struggles with social anxiety. Now, I know what I said at the beginning. Introversion is not the same as social anxiety, and that's true, but I also know that a lot of introverts also have social anxiety, myself included, and this movie does a great job representing that. I do believe Kayla's an introvert. She basically describes herself as one in the very first scene of the movie, but 8th Grade is more concerned with her social anxiety. We see her struggling trying to talk to other people. We see how her confidence and self-esteem take a hit every time she can properly do small talk, and we see how her body language gives away how uncomfortable and nervous she gets in social situations. And everything's so freaking accurate. All through the movie, I just wanted to hug her and tell her that everything was going to be okay, and I wanted to hug my younger self and tell him that everything was going to be okay. In one of the best scenes of the movie, she gets invited to a pool party, and I could feel every single bit of anxiety she gets right before she joins the big crowd, because I've been there many times before and I had never seen it so accurately represented on the big screen. This is one of the best coming-of-age movies I have ever seen, but it's also one of the cringiest. It's not because it's bad, it's because it represents middle school so accurately, which is like arguably the cringiest and most awkward phase of our lives. Please watch it, you're not going to regret it. It's a great movie. It's emotional, heartbreaking, poignant, and very relevant. It was my favorite movie of 2018 along with Roma, and it definitely deserved more love. If you still have doubts about watching 8th Grade, just watch the trailer and you're gonna immediately want to watch the movie. Ron Swanson is one of the main characters of Parks and Recreation, a sitcom about the employees of the Parks and Recreation department of the fictional city of Pawnee. Ron is the director of the department, who is ironically an anti-government libertarian. He loves building things, breakfast food, spending time out in nature, and woodworking. And he hates dishonesty, hugs, and talking about his feelings. He's a very private person. He doesn't share any personal information with anyone, and he doesn't trust technology. He's also not a very emotional person. According to him, he has only cried twice, when he was hit by a bus and when little Sebastian, the town's famous miniature horse, died. Even though he is a public servant, he despises interacting with the public. He actually hired April Ludgate, another great character of the series, because of her ability to get rid of people. He enjoys being alone, and actually in one of my favorite Ron Swanson moments of the series, he is afraid that Leslie will throw him a surprise party for his birthday, but instead she organizes him a quiet night in, a steak dinner for one, and a private projection of his favorite movie, because she knew that for him, that was the definition of a perfect birthday. If you haven't watched this show, I highly recommend that you do. I personally haven't rewatched this show in a few years now, but I think I'm gonna do just that after finishing Community. Save the best for last. I know some of you might find this ending a bit anticlimactic, but Tim Drake is my favorite fictional character of all time, along with Hiccup. Tim is the third and best Robin, and yes, for those of you who might not know, Batman has had many different Robins. 5 to be exact. Tim is sarcastic, geeky, and has a very strong moral compass. Unlike all of the other Robins and most of the other superheroes, Tim didn't become a costume hero because of a tragic backstory. He did it only because he wanted to help. He figured out Batman's identity when he was only 9, and when he was 13, he started to notice that Batman had grown more violent and reckless after the death of Jason Todd, the second Robin. So he decided to intervene, and after a series of complicated events, he became the third Robin because, in his own words, Batman needs a Robin. Tim is incredibly intelligent, resourceful, and capable of creating complicated plans on the fly. He is the smartest of the 5 Robins, and he is the world's second greatest detective, just after Batman. He is deeply analytical, and he is another fellow INTP. He doesn't have the confidence, charisma, or leadership abilities of Dick Grayson, the first Robin, but he is also a very good leader, having led the Teen Titans and the Young Justice for multiple years. He's also not the social butterfly that Dick Grayson is, but he does have a small group of friends that he cares a lot about. Unlike all of the other Robins, Tim's personality is very similar to Batman's, which is like arguably the most famous introvert in comics. He's much more logical than emotional, but he cares deeply about his friends and family. Out of all the characters in comics, Tim is by far the one that I can relate to the most. He's an amazing character that definitely deserves more love and recognition. If you want to know more about this character, I highly recommend that you read Batman: A Lonely Place to Die In, Robin 2: The Joker's Wild, and the 2009 Red Robin series. So that's it. Those were 8 of my favorite introverted characters in fiction. Please tell me what are some of yours, and if you have any interest in knowing more about some of the characters that I talked about after watching this video. Thanks for watching!